Hello friends, welcome to the Big Talk. I'm Trisha Brooke. Welcome to a special season of the Big Talk. In this season, I'm going to be talking with the most amazing guests from Podcast Row. Podcast Row's mission is to connect entrepreneurs with podcasters to help them share their story. In January, this exclusive event was held in New York City, along with an incredible partnership with GLOW, the Global League of Women founded by Lisa Wang. GLOW is a new female-first community, amplifying female voices that address critical issues, stories, and thoughts from business to politics and personal challenges. All of my guests this season have an incredible story, and you all know how important story is here on the Big Talk. I am super excited to welcome our featured guest, the incredible Gina Molinari. Gina, are you ready to drop in?
Absolutely.
Gina Molinari, affectionately known as Gina Mo, is a never-has-been opera singer turned online marketing strategist and communications coach. She uses her unique background of performance skills, marketing, and emotional intelligence to coach others into clearly and confidently marketing themselves and their business in a way that feels good and creates consistent results and visibility in their business. Gina, take a minute to fill us in on anything I missed and talk a little about you.
Yeah, I mean, those are the big ones, right? I originally grew up in New Jersey, just outside New York, so I guess I kind of had the stereotypical dream of being at Lincoln Center and singing at the Met or something like that, but, plans did not go as according. So like I said, and like you had said in my bio there, that I went to be an opera singer in my undergrad. I know you have an arts background yourself, so you kind of know about that pivot, right? And when I went to my undergrad, I realized what debilitating performance anxiety I really had. And that obviously put a huge damper on my future. And when I auditioned for grad school at the same school that I went to, I didn't get in. And so it was this huge blow to the ego of where I was really heading, and I got to reevaluate. And so there's been a lot of pivoting since then to really come where I am now. But I think that's really shaped and been able to give me all these really unique skills that come together to really create what I create now.
Let's talk a little bit about the opera background, and then we'll move into the entrepreneurial.
Absolutely.
I want to know why you decided to go the opera route. Did you always sing?
I always sang. I was that little kid, like singing in the grocery cart when my parents were bringing me around the store. And there was one memory I have of singing in the shower. The Little Mermaid was my jam. That was my movie that was on repeat. Everybody's got that one movie. And I would sing along with the songs, but I always had that anxiety about somebody hearing me sing. But because I was young and I didn't understand acoustics, I would just pause it when they came in the room, not thinking that they can hear me when they're not in the room. And so that sort of anxiety has always been there. And there was one time where I was singing in the shower. My brother audio recorded me outside the door, and he played it back, not meaning to be mean or point out, how terrible I was, but it was just so mortifying for me for some reason. And I actually haven't sung in the shower since. I'm 34 years old now, so it's been a long time, and I've never sung in the shower since. But I mean, really, it's just always something I loved. And when I got to about 12 years old, and I realized I really wanted to develop that talent, I just had a teacher who had classical training, and she experimented with the 24 Italian songs and arias, which those of you who are unfamiliar, it's basically the ABCs of classical music. And I just had an affinity for it. I loved the challenge of the foreign languages. I loved the challenge of something that was just a little bit different than what other people were doing.
Clearly you are an artist.
Yes.
And that never goes away, whether
No.
you sing in the shower or not.
Correct.
How have you been able to approach your business through the eyes of an artist?
I think the creativity is just something that as an entrepreneur you have to have anyway. It's this innovation and this drive to do whatever it takes. So being able to be creative and be engaging more than anything. I mean, when I'm on a stage or when I'm in a podcast like this, I know I need to be engaging in order to make that impact that other people can sometimes struggle because everybody's got their story, everybody's got something to teach. But if you're not engaging, you're not really landing the point. So I find a really fun way always to connect with somebody because everybody's different. I can't be the same bubbly person to connect with you that I could be with somebody else who's maybe a little more introverted, a little more passive. So having the creativity to read people and really give them what they need to connect with me is something that I really love playing with. It's kind of acting in a way, but it's still authentically me.
That's awesome, Gina. I want to dig a little deeper into what you just said about
Sure.
how you connect with someone.
Mm-hmm.
And as a speaker, when you're on stage, or as a communicator, when you're connecting with a client or a relationship of any kind, it's about understanding what they need, going after your objective, and understanding the action to play. And that's the actor thing, right?
Yes,
that we've
absolutely.
talked about. So I want to hear more about, as a communicator who is nervous, who has stage fright, how do you negotiate that for yourself?
So I love to tell people to lean on some sort of crutch, right? Like crutches get a bad rap of, oh, you shouldn't be leaning on this sort of crutch in some way. But if that's what it takes for you to break through some real fears that you're having, just so that you feel a little bit safe and go outside your comfort zone, then I say use them. So whether that's holding onto a microphone because you're shielding your body just a little bit, and that's not to say that you should always do that, but it's something to get you started. So for me in particular, I've just done it enough times that now I can do that with minimal fear. Not no fear, there's still times when I have the adrenaline running, but to be able to use those crutches sometimes when I need them just to get me over the hump of that initial fear, because often that's all it takes is that initial fear, break through that, and then you're okay. So being able to then be in front of the room and connect with people, reading their energy, their body language, there's so many little signs that we get, and just being receptive to that and not imposing my need or what makes me most comfortable on them. It's just practice.
And how do you feel in terms of being a listener? I know being a communicator starts with being a listener.
I struggled with listening for a long time. I was one of those people who listened to respond. I always wanted to be the funny one. I wanted to be the smart one. And I held my identity very much attached to those two things for a long time. But now, again, with more practice and just being around different types of people and even just getting feedback. I mean, getting the feedback that you're not really listening to me, or seeing other examples of it in other people where they're really not listening. I have some family members in particular who you can just tell they're looking at you, but they're not really listening. They're just kind of, we joke, it's like double Dutch, you're just kind of waiting to jump in. Not my turn, not my turn. Okay, there we go. It feels like that. And I never want people to feel that way with me. And I realized that having that experience, feeling that way with somebody else, was something I never wanted to replicate again.
Do you feel like not singing in the shower is a place that you had to mourn? Not singing in the shower, not allowing your full creativity to come out. The reason I'm asking is because you're such an excellent communicator.
Thank you.
And what you do in your work is about communication and about helping other people tell their stories. I want to dig deeper into your story about that loss of the girl who sang in the shower. And do you think bringing her back could help you be an even more intentional communicator?
I do, and it's something I've thought about actually pretty recently, maybe in the last year or two. I hadn't put that together, that I don't sing in the shower. I think somebody made a joke about it, and it got me thinking, like, wait, no, I really haven't done that in years. And having that realization as an adult that that's something that happened, and that was kind of, it was a traumatic experience in some ways, right? Not in the traditional sense, but to me it was. And so seeing that as an adult, I've actually experimented, if I had an audition coming up back in the day when I was still pursuing music, trying and feeling how challenging that was. I mean, that is such a metaphor for what I teach people to do too, right? Because it's this fear, it's uncomfortable, it's getting out of my comfort zone. And even though it's safe in there, logically, I know there's nothing wrong with doing that. Yeah, I'm in an apartment and I have neighbors that could possibly hear, but it's amazing to me still how uncomfortable that is just because I'm so out of practice. So being able to break through that and working on it now, actually one of the things that I envision moving forward with keynotes is coming out singing my own anthem. Everybody comes out to, their own sort of theme song, right? I envision coming out singing my own, simply so that I can be an immediate example of breaking through those fears so that you can do something impactful. That if I'm setting the example, doing something that scares me still, because singing still scares me, but I get practice. I force myself, and I don't like to use that word force, but I do. I force myself to continue breaking through that fear. So absolutely, I definitely see the value in breaking through some more creativity with that.
I love this so much, Gina. And for any of my listeners who know me, Speakers Who Dare is my speaker platform that I produce every year. And when I find out something like the fact that you are doing keynotes and you may consider coming out singing an aria, I get super excited about what that might look like.
Yeah.
Awesome. I would love for you to share with our listeners, Gina, this whole idea of fear and rejection. When you're an entrepreneur, when you're a speaker, it is the same experience as an actor, as a creative. You are dealing with fear and rejection on a daily basis. How do you personally work through it, and how do you share with your clients how to deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many schools of thought on this. Immediately comes to mind is like Grant Cardone, and he's all about this 10x effort because, it's a numbers game essentially. And I do believe that to a limit. He definitely expands on that in probably a more aggressive way than I do. But it is absolutely a numbers game. Just doing it enough times, failing enough times that it just starts to disappear. And I'm a huge advocate of fearless being bullshit, if I can quite frankly say. I just don't believe that there's such thing as fearlessness. I think maybe your fears are different than mine, so to me you appear fearless in a certain way, but I know you have your fears and they're just different. So the idea of having to wait to be fearless or to work until I'm fearless in doing something is just not a reality, and kind of accepting that I think is something that was a really important realization for me, that it may never go away completely and I just get to figure out how to navigate around it. And especially since, like you pointed out, I mean, the pursuing performance is exactly the same level of rejection as entrepreneurship. But now that I'm here and I've done all this work and emotional intelligence and leadership and whatnot, I don't have that same debilitating fear that I did when I was singing. So I know that I've had to change and not the industry itself.
I think everything you're saying is so useful for the listeners who want to take big stages, and for business owners who get up in the morning and think, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
I think that we're constantly dealing with our own personal fears, like you said, and if you can become friends with the rejection and hear it as not yet instead of no,
Yes.
that will give you a lot of fuel to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
I would love for you to unpack a little bit the way you identify and work with emotional intelligence and leadership in your business, but also as a keynote speaker.
Yeah, so my introduction to it was actually about 4 years ago now, going through a leadership training, and they focus a lot on emotional intelligence and this idea of restructuring your limiting beliefs. And that introduction was really my first introduction into professional and personal development, and I've just been obsessed with that work since, quite frankly. And
Tell me more about that.
yeah, so, well, what do you want to know exactly? Like,
What are
that
you
looks like?
obsessed with?
I just learning. I've always been somebody who really loved to learn, and seeing how these things in even such a brief period of time. I mean, the second training I went to, it was like a long weekend of training. So I went to the first one, and I was living in New York City at the time, loved it, went out to Columbus, Ohio for it. Okay, great, I'll come back for the second one. The second one, again, come out from New York City, and I realized in the middle of it, I am very unhappy, and I am paying a lot of money to be very unhappy in New York. Do over, and 2 weeks later I moved to Columbus.
So that takes so much courage.
Yeah.
Did you have fear around that?
Oh, totally. Mostly because I was afraid my parents would think I joined a cult. I had never been out there before, and I had no family out there. I mean, all my family's in New Jersey. It was a very abrupt thing, and I'm very much typically a ducks in a row sort of person. But I didn't see it as courage. I felt my gut screaming at me. It was the first time that I really followed my intuition with no logic behind it. And just allowing myself the space to try something new and see what growth came from that, because I saw what was possible in just a few short days with this sort of program in this community. So it was really interesting just to see over those couple months of being in that training what that did, and then knowing that, okay, if I'm just doing this a little bit every day for the foreseeable future, what else is possible? And for the first time, the dreams that I had in my head, I allowed myself to be possible, as opposed to just immediately shutting them down and saying, I can't do this. It's not possible.
And the world opened up to you, right?
Finally, yeah.
You raised your vibration to meet the frequency of the universe.
And I didn't even know what that meant before that point, but yeah, that's exactly what happened. Yeah.
I love that. Well, talk more about the emotional intelligence and leadership now that you've stepped fully into who you are and what you're meant to do.
The biggest way I use it now in my communication coaching is I use it as an indicator. It's like a red flag to me when somebody's speaking, because people have no idea how much they're saying things that are actually kind of a tip of what's really going on psychologically with you. So if you're saying like, oh, I need to do this, I need to do that, I have this sense that, okay, you feel like it's an obligation. It's not something you necessarily enjoy, or, oh, I think I can do this. Do you think you can, or do you really believe you can, or do you really want it? I hope to do this. I want to, like all of these sort of disempowering words, passive language. They're all indicators to me as a coach of where your blocks are and where that sort of underlying limiting belief is coming from. So the very first thing we start with most of my clients is this sort of, fill in the blank sort of thing. I am blank. I most fear blank. I am most proud when I blank, and really getting in there of like, okay, what fuels you? What debilitates you? And what is it you truly, truly want? Because by doing that very rapid fire sort of thing, you get in there. And I had one client in particular I'm thinking of, I think the prompt was, deep down, I believe I am blank. And she said rock star, and she almost immediately began to cry because she's like, I don't know where that came from. I don't really believe that. It's like, oh, but you do. And by the time we were done working together, 60 days later, she was like, I do think I'm a rock star. I know I create rock star results with my clients. And it was just amazing to watch her transformation simply because we played a little psychological game with her at first.
That's so exciting. I just got goosebumps when you shared that story, Gina. I am very much aware of how people speak and the power of communication, just like you. And I had the privilege of analyzing Prince Andrew's debacle on the BBC.
Ooh.
So I would love to know from you if you can do a quick analysis of what's going on Capitol Hill and in the White House in terms of communication.
Oh my God. I've heard from plenty of people who have professional mental health degrees and, they're psychotherapists and things, that he is the stereotypical narcissist, right? So without even hearing that, without knowing that, you can just see it in that man's body language. You can see the passiveness. One of the things I noticed that's really, and I've never gotten to talk about it publicly before, so thank you for bringing this up. One of the things I noticed, anytime you see a picture of a congressman or somebody in political power of any kind, they have this very stereotypical mouth photo that they have. It's all... And in researching that, it's, for those of you who are not watching but listening, it's like this, I don't even know how to describe that. How do you describe
Pursed
that?
lips.
Yeah, the opposite of pursed lips, where like they're in and you're kind of like biting on your lips. But yeah, it's just, there's this very stereotypical lip thing that they do that it's shame. And it's very, very common, and I've noticed that in other people, and I've actually been able to translate that with clients, like, you do that thing. I know you're feeling some shame in this, so it's super interesting, but, the body language from everybody, it's just, I have a hard time following politics because there's it screams bullshit at me. It screams inauthenticity and disingenuousness, and it's very challenging for me not to feel it, not to, just the same way when certain singers sing, like I can feel how they're doing the technique, and if it's unhealthy, I can feel the damage they're doing, so it's a struggle, quite frankly. So to see that and to feel their body language and the word choices they're making be so loudly the opposite of what they're trying to say, oof, talk about that emotional intelligence sort of red flag. That just drives me crazy.
In addition to your expertise in communication, you've also got this tapped in emotional intelligence piece, which means you see and feel it all.
Yes.
I can only imagine why you don't watch the news.
Yeah, I do, because obviously, I want to be informed, but at the same time, it's a challenge. It really is.
Can you share with our listeners, Gina, why you think story is so important?
I'm writing an entire book on that right now, actually. So story is one of the most powerful and quickest ways to connect with people and to really have that intimate emotional sort of connection. And I know Brene Brown is really bringing vulnerability to a whole new level in our culture right now. But vulnerability, I really do believe, is the key to connection, and the key to connection is communication, and communication is the way that we can really change the world. Because when we have open, honest, respectful conversation, then that's when change can really happen. And you can't do that if you're not vulnerable, if you're hiding things, if you're lying, if you're silent. That's just not possible. So to me, that's the quickest and the most powerful gateway to that connection, to have conversation.
Let's talk a little bit more about how we know it's time to be vulnerable, and when it's time to share that story. Because I know a lot of speakers and a lot of communicators share too soon, or they wait and then it becomes very just so easy to share a very vulnerable, painful story, and they have no emotion around it. So I would love for you, as an expert in the field of communication and leadership, to talk a little bit about those two things.
Yeah, I think I've heard different schools. I've heard different schools of thought around vulnerability, and some people say, you really shouldn't, that it should be saved for people who really deserve your vulnerability because maybe they can use it against you or something. But my problem with that idea is that that implies that your vulnerability, whatever that may be, whether it's a past experience or anything, is something that can still hurt you. But if you're really owning it, if you're really accepting it, and like you say, and you kind of alluded to this in your talk with me yesterday, that you shouldn't share it before you're ready and you're about to fall to pieces on stage. That leaves everybody feeling very uncomfortable, kind of like I was just describing with politics. And I think it's important for you to really own it and work through whatever it is that you've experienced. So all the pains that I've had before, all of the failures and the missteps and all of those things, like I've done the work to feel that pain, and I haven't stifled it so that I can whip it out later for a soundbite. Like that's not effective. So, I mean, if you haven't worked through it, then you can still talk about it in a way that has emotion without it being completely disconnected from that. To me, that means you haven't actually worked through all of it. You just kind of stuffed it, and that's a totally different animal. That's not vulnerability. That's just narration at that point.
Oh, I love that. That's so, so powerful. That's just narration. I want all of our listeners to take that in for a second. Gina, I also know how important confidence and consistency is to you.
Yes.
Talk more about that for us.
To me, that's this beautiful cycle. So the work that I do with people is often a mindset and a strategy combination, and it's because the confidence, people keep waiting to have confidence to take action, right? But really it's the opposite that kind of breeds the confidence to build it, which then creates more consistency, which then creates more confidence. And being able to fail faster means that you learn faster, means that you can pivot faster. And I've kind of gone through a bunch of different industries in my life, and if I had not done that, then I wouldn't know my true purpose now. I had to find my way through all of that, but I had to take action to do that. If I had just sat still, hoping that it would come to me one day, I might still be fetal on the couch, in New York City, paying far too much for rent and being very unhappy. But I had to take action and do something. Even if they were the wrong things, now I can rule those out for later. So it builds my confidence that, okay, now that's one less thing for me to wonder about and ask what if. So creating that cycle of confidence and consistency, I think, is what's really, really empowering to people, because whether or not they feel like they're getting closer, they ultimately are.
How do you show up for your clients in terms of modeling consistency and confidence?
I get to do it all the time. There is no stopping. And a lot of times that is the reason that I set up the sort of model that I have, is because it keeps me accountable. If I'm teaching this, I have to be accountable to myself to do that. So, in December, for example, I went live every day in December to teach a little bit of something, just like a little 5-minute video to teach something. And it's because I know I struggle with going live as often as I should. It's a fantastic marketing strategy right now, and I knew that I wanted to create that consistency, and it was through Christmas. So even Christmas Day I did that, Christmas Eve I did that, the whole thing. And I didn't want to do it some days, but you know what, I showed up anyway, and I showed up in a way that was supportive for them, because ultimately it's for them, it's not for me. So to do that and create some sort of scenario where I'm accountable to myself, not to somebody else, not to some coach, I have to be accountable to myself, and remembering that even if it's just a little something every day, that even breeds the consistency and that confidence that, okay, well, I did a little something yesterday, I do it today. And you look back a month and you're like, wow, actually I created a whole lot in a month. It just didn't look like it or feel like it that day.
That's so, so awesome. And living in that discomfort is how we grow.
Yes.
And how we experience having fear. Like you said, nobody's fearless. I love that. And I also think it's important to talk about and to unpack a little bit for the listeners that you didn't feel like going live every single day, but you made a choice that you were going to do that, and you made it about the audience. And that's the same thing that needs to happen when a speaker takes a stage.
Yes.
If you don't have the technique underneath you actually taking the stage on a day you don't feel like it, it's going to not be a good situation for anybody, for you, for the audience. So I would love for you to talk to the listeners a little bit about how you, in your desire to be consistent and to increase your confidence, also understood that you had to do something while you were going live to make it happen.
Yeah, so Again, it's being clear about what that intention is, kind of revisiting the vision and the mission every day of like, all right, this is what I came here to do. I am committed to creating a world that communicates freely and openly and honestly. My vision for the world is really being in a place where you say something to me and I can take you at your word. I don't have to worry that you lied to me, that you're not going to follow through on it, or that you're hiding something from me and you're just saying something to be a little nice. Like, that's my vision. And to give,
yes, I
yeah.
support you.
Good.
100%. Yes.
Party. So to be able to support people who really have game-changing ideas and wisdom and stories, I mean, that's just going to create it on a whole new scale too, right? To really be able to create a powerful ripple effect. So to remind myself of that, I mean, it just jazzes me up even saying it now. And granted, I'm already in a pretty, solid mood and my energy's high, but to remind myself of that, of why I'm really doing it. Or sometimes I go back and watch my own stuff and re-pump myself up because in that moment I had high energy and it's hard not to, have that be contagious. So doing whatever, just having a bunch of tools in my tool belt of, okay, let's give this a shot. Maybe this is the thing that's going to get me there. Or sometimes, what they say about going to the gym, sometimes you just got to get in the door. Sometimes just getting it started, I get myself amped up and giving it a shot. But it just trying different things, trying and finding what works for me, having that crutch, whatever that crutch looks like, just to get me over that first initial hump of fear, laziness, whatever it is that I'm experiencing in that moment.
So good, Gina. I want to know what you're working on in terms of your big talk right now.
Ooh, yeah. So the book is the focus right now, and it's called Why I Love to Make People Cry. And it's this whole thing about how connection and communication are really powerful. Like, to me, it is a huge compliment to make somebody cry because they got that vulnerable, that real and raw with me, or that I touched them in some way with something that I said or something that I shared that it really broke them open. So that's really the big focus. But I mean, the big talk that like I said, just being able to create a world where everybody can be authentic and feel safe to be authentic. Because I think that's the big fear, is not that people don't want to be, that they're afraid to be, because it's the judgment or the failure that's going to come with that. And really being able to influence people to use their voices, even if it's not the popular idea or popular thought.
So good. Can you share with our listeners why it's important for them to share their story?
Because if you don't, who will? And even if you think it's something, and I want you to hear this, even if you think it's something that's been said 1,000 times before, there is something about the way that you say it, whether it's because of the tone of your voice or the word choices that you make, your body language, just because you look like their mom or something like that. There is some reason that someone needs to hear you say that particular thing. And they could have heard it 1,000 times before, but when you say it, it'll finally land for them and possibly change their life. And I have witnessed that happen to myself, repeating quotes from other people and giving them credit for those quotes, not saying it's mine, but it's something that moves them. And you have that power, and you keeping it to yourself is selfish, quite frankly. If you think that your fear of being repetitive, of your fear of sounding like everybody else is more important than somebody else's breakthrough, then you have more stuff to work through yourself.
I am so on board with that, Gina. And I want to thank you for being a featured guest today on The Big Talk.
Thank you for having me.
Where can our listeners get in touch with you?
GinaMolinari.com is always the best option because you can email me directly. I absolutely check all of my emails personally. And Facebook is where I do the most content, be able to share my tips and stuff, and that's facebook.com/theGinaMo.
And we will put all of this in the show notes. Thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoyed this special season of The Big Talk with guests from Podcast Row and the Global League of Women. Check out the next episode, and remember, live your truth, be your authentic self, and drop in.